Well, let's go to a big story we're all going to be watching today from the business perspective here in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to open the second Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium today. It's quite a mouthful. Government has been meeting with financiers and investors ahead of today's gathering. It's part of the country's drive to upgrade infrastructure and create some much-needed jobs. So the man on the job for us to unpack all of it, our colleague Devan Murugan at the Sandton Convention Centre, joining us. Now, hello to you, Devan. So it's another symposium to secure infrastructure investment. So we've got to ask ourselves, if this is another one, what's our track record been like so far?
Yeah, good morning, Gareth. Interesting question, of course. And we need infrastructure investment and investment overall, simply because that's the only mechanism in which we can grow the economy and create much-needed jobs while at the same time upgrading our infrastructure. So what happens here at the symposium, Gareth? Well, over the past few weeks or days, government has been sitting down and speaking to financiers and investors and showing them these potential projects. And what they're trying to do is get them to actually buy into it. There's been some success, as you alluded to in your intro there. This is the second one. So last year, we've managed to get about 340 billion rand from these investors to actually be targeted towards certain projects. Now, I'm talking about building bridges, putting up schools. What about the water situations, dams, for example? These are not projects that actually, take off overnight. They require a long session of planning and sorting out in terms of finances. So 340 billion rand secured last year. This year, the target is somewhat different, but with the same mechanism. I spoke to the Public Works Minister, Patricia de Lille, last year about the parameters of what they're trying to seek this time around. Let's take a listen.
The 55 new projects being presented to the market are from various sectors valued at about 595 billion, with a funding gap of around 441 billion. And collectively, the estimated employment opportunities from these projects amount to just over 538,000 job opportunities.
Devan, I'm sure it's the old story, and no doubt as well that government can't upgrade the country's entire infrastructure all by themselves. No doubt it's calling for private sector participation as well, and this is going to be crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've got a backlog, no doubt, in this country. As I said, water infrastructure. You look at some of the municipalities at the moment and some of the protests and strikes happening. Very often, this is because of that poor delivery there. So, putting up dams across the country, government alone cannot come up with this money. The fiscus just can't handle it. So you're quite right when you say this private sector intervention is important. But remember, you've got to convince the private investor to put money in this country. And how do you do that? You've got to make sure that his money is safe, or he or she's money is safe, and make sure the business conditions, the ease of doing business are favorable. And we've been speaking about this phrase, Gareth, structural reform. Do we have energy security in this country? Do we have labor laws that are digestible in this country? What about the roads and ports? Can business people who actually put their money into these projects actually be convinced that there is a return into this? And this is what the head of investment in the president's office, Dr. Cyril Ramaphosa, was talking about yesterday on the eve of this. He says, look, investors have to be convinced. They believe that the job is going well so far, but we need such a wide-scale level of investment in this country to take care of that dreadful unemployment rate. The more bridges go up, the more work available there is. And 11.9 million people out of work in this country. So we've got to convince the private sector to actually do something. And he put it quite nicely yesterday when he says this is the job of how government and the private sector meets hand in hand or halfway on some of these big multi-billion rand projects. Let's take a listen.
The ones in human settlements. So private sector brings their own money. They say we want to do this mega settlement. But we have found that they still need an instrument to finance the bulk infrastructure. So when you put retail, when you put up a mega human settlement, you still need water, energy, you must broaden the roads. So that's what we call bulk infrastructure. But that's the responsibility of municipalities, and you know that the balance sheet of municipalities has deteriorated because of subjective and objective reasons. So now we're working with National Treasury to resolve that. So we're able, through an instrument called a catalytic infrastructure fund. So we should be in a position to unleash these projects.
Yeah, we need to be put into the position to unleash these projects. As you say, building bridges, both literally, Devan, and also proverbially as well. What time does everything get underway at the Sandton Convention Centre?
All right, so officially, Gareth, the program starts at 9 o'clock. Of course, all eyes are going to be on the President Cyril Ramaphosa. He speaks at 10:30 this morning. And just around that speech and after that address, we've got what we always see at these conferences, these sort of workshops and these panel discussions where we address things like municipality effectiveness funding there, what happens with ports across the country, railway tracks, for example, and rail transport and logistics. What about green energy? So all of these things happen after 2 o'clock in different rooms. As I said, the big one, 10:30 coming up, President Cyril Ramaphosa will talk to this gathering, when it's full, of course, about what the achievements have been thus far, Gareth.
And hopefully it's going to be fascinating to hear what the President has to say, lots of solutions, but more importantly, Devan, those various discussions later in the day as well. Back to you again later this morning, and I'm sure this afternoon. Devan Murugan from eNCA.